Hello and welcome to episode 32 of my Kerbal Space Program NASA series. I got a little ahead of myself apparently. I thought I was a lot closer to being prepared for Venture Star than I actually was, but a lot of the structural parts that I need for it are locked up in a higher science tier. So in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and unlock the hypersonic flight tier and start working on some advanced, very high-speed aircraft, which really it's all overkill. The basic turbojet engine, at least in this version that I'm playing now, 1.0 has since released, and I have not really played a lot with it to see how things have been rebalanced, but at least in the version I'm playing, the basic turbojet is good for at least Mach 3, so really in the way of engines, there's, except for the dual mode engines, really not much need to go with anything more powerful. Getting back to work with the space shuttle, because it's apparently going to be in use for a little bit longer. While I did this flight, I actually shot that science center footage after I did this flight. I was a little further out from switching over to Venture Star than I thought, but when I shot this, I decided to take extra special care, thinking it was one of my last shuttle missions. So there's a lot of just goofing off and long shots, really showing off the shuttle, which kind of works out for the best because I tend to just kind of use it and not really show it off all that much. So kind of gives everybody a better look at it in this video. The roll program and SRB separation complete. Just gotta keep pushing that periaps up. You can see the periaps I have set at 63 kilometers. That is just barely inside the atmosphere. So that fuel tank is going to have to take a couple orbits before it finally gets caught and falls back down. But this is the space shuttle in the crew transfer configuration. The payload bay is pretty much completely taken up by extra crew capacity. Those structural fuselages don't really do anything. I just decided to put them in there to kind of look like a crew tunnel. Kind of like the old Space Lab module that used to fly on the real shuttle. Using RCS to separate from the tank and set my apoaps to its final height. And since I tend to try and operate this thing pretty realistically by keeping it belly up towards the sun, I haven't really shown many views of the outside of the shuttle with direct sunlight on it, so decided to roll the shuttle belly down and start kind of showing off how things look and fit together on it. That extra structural fuselage with the docking adapters, the docking ports, that is going to be the Space Shuttle docking adapter. It'll also be used by Venture Star, but as I established in my previous video, I really don't have the capability to dock the shuttle with the station where I want to put it. So this will be the final assembly mission flown by the Space Shuttle, but we're also delivering the station's very first crew. A nice long look at the shuttle as it travels over the Terminator band. You can just barely see that fuel tank underneath the shuttle's starboard wing. And the reason why I tend to rotate the shuttle belly down, I don't know if I've explained this before, but in real life, because the space shuttle had its thermal tiles on the lower side of it, they would rotate the shuttle and try to keep the bottom side facing the sun to keep from absorbing too much heat. And those cargo bay doors were actually radiators. They had radiators built into them so they could regulate the heat process on the shuttle. And by keeping those on the dark side, they tend to lose a little more heat. By the time it came ready for the circularization burn, the tank had separated by about 4 kilometers just from that tiny puff of RCS I gave at separation. I was trying not to raise periaps too much because I was very out of phase with the station, and I wanted to minimize my orbits before I caught the KSS. You see about 5 in-game hours later, finally get within visual range of the station and start trying to prepare to install this docking module. First order of business is to kind of bleed off any relative velocity. I don't want to be heading towards it while focusing on any other operations. And at this point, I've cranked up the speed to 4 times time acceleration in post-processing, just because this is kind of a tedious operation, and it's always better to watch these at high speed. Get a little bit of relative velocity towards the station, but set myself on a trajectory where I know I will miss, and slow enough that I'll be able to hit the brakes with the RCS in an emergency and come to a pretty quick stop. At this point, it's time to capture the docking adapter so I can get ready to install it. Making a couple minute course adjustments to make sure we don't barrel into the station while I'm focusing on something else. Looks like we're going to miss, so start getting... First I have to deploy the docking adapter with its little decoupler, and that kind of gave me an indication of how little mass was in this, because that was, you can see that's one of the very smallest decouplers in the game, and it kind of rocketed that thing forward. Didn't actually have enough mass to dampen out the force of coming together with the shuttle's docking port, so it just kind of kept doing that. And I was hesitant to hit time warp because I was fairly certain that would just break the docking force, and that could cause several problems as far as collider meshes go. So the payload specialist comes out and tries to headbutt it into submission. Slows it down a great deal by timing his collisions pretty well. The shuttle's able to just kind of make some adjustments to make it grab. Pretty boring installation process, but like I said, I thought this was going to be my very final space shuttle mission, so I was taking extra special care to document as much of it as I could. But however, turns out this will be with me for a little bit longer at least, which I should probably fly a servicing mission up to the telescope that I still have in orbit so I can put some more advanced internals on it so I can get a little more science production from it. Unfortunately, with that rather wild capture, the docking adapter is not exactly aligned to the shuttle. So first I have to make sure I get it aligned to the station before I install it. Which is going to put the shuttle at kind of an awkward angle, but once I get this thing installed, so long as I'm reasonably accurate with it, I can line the shuttles up much more easily using the docking alignment tool versus eyeballing it. And as far as scale goes, my KSS is extremely little compared to the real one. The space shuttle was big, but if you ever see those very rare pictures they were able to take with it attached to the station, they make the shuttle, the ISS makes the real space shuttle even look pretty tiny. Hit it with a decent amount of force, so it kind of sends the whole station ringing there for a second. Before reorienting the shuttle, decide to get the station set correctly. It was a rather tedious process, but caution first. This thing's mainly held together with docking ports, and I do not want to shake it apart. Especially after I spent all this time building it. It'd be a terrible shame to have it destroy itself before I ever got to use it. Would also make all these videos extremely pointless. So I can get a little wild there. And it's only just now looking at this, I notice I got that solar array on the top of the screen installed incorrectly. I may have to flip that around. Once the station completes its turn, decided to repark the shuttle. It's a lot easier than the initial docking maneuver. Just had to pull off a slight distance. Didn't get it perfect, but close enough, for my purposes anyway. So that is the fairly complete International Space Station with shuttle attached. I'd forgotten actually what experiment modules I had installed on the thing, so had to refamiliarize myself with that and then transfer the science crew over. The flight crew will be taking the space shuttle back with the without the science crew, because I didn't want to maybe get a little forgetful and accidentally drain the space shuttle's life support. So, and I've been wanting to do this since I started this project. I didn't want to actually look through the cupola module until I had everything completely built, but in my opinion, personally for me, it was well worth the wait and the effort. It is super cool seeing the bits of station hanging around just outside my view. Being able to see the space shuttle, the Soyuz, and all the other bits and bobs. Finally, the flight crew bids adieu to the people who will be living aboard the station for the next several months while the science experiments run. Actually, it's like 50 Kerbal days, I think is what it said, so not that long of a period of time, but still. The station's automated control systems, going to realign it. I honestly have no idea how station keeping works. I mean, I know they use control moment gyros and an RCS system, but I don't know what the strategy for station keeping on the space shuttle is, or on the International Space Station, as far as keeping it oriented. That is something I have not really looked into a whole lot. Breaking into the emergency tanks. Well, not really emergency, just range extension tanks to start preparing for the return back to Kerbin. And this was actual frame rate with these two rather large vessels on screen. You see it's starting to be kind of a draw on resources. First step, setting periaps to 90 kilometers. Then circularizing down there. It's not as efficient, but as I've said many times, it makes the return a lot safer. And finally, after getting into the correct position, set the periaps to 35 kilometers over Kerbal Space Center. Then start configuring for landing return. Turning off cargo bay lights, closing cargo bay doors. And before I actually hit the atmosphere, I set the shuttle to a 60-degree nose-low angle prograde, and so by the time it comes around to hitting the atmosphere, I'm usually at about 35-40 degrees nose up, which is traditionally what the space shuttle, the real shuttle, used for re-entry. I don't know if that's the perfect angle for my shuttle or not. I just figured it worked for them, and it seems to work for me so far, so I'll run with it. Had a pretty decent approach. Came in not too high, not too low. Plenty of room to manage my energy on the way to the landing. Alignment wasn't too bad. And again, I was still under the impression this would be one of my last shuttle flights, so I was trying my very best to make a rock star landing this pass. Little bit bouncy there, but not too bad. Little left of the center line, but all around decent landing. And now comes the moment I've been waiting for. Time to shake down Hermes and take it for a trip around Minmus. We're launching the crew in a Soyuz. Jebediah, being our lead test pilot, is going to get the first crack behind the controls of the Hermes Duna transfer vehicle. And for something I just kind of threw together, I really like my little Soyuz. It's quite a handy little ship. Just needs a booster to get itself into space, and then on its own power it can pretty much get anywhere it needs to go. fairly certain it could circularize, and if I set my free return correctly, it'd probably make it out to the moon and back. Crew makes a sunset rendezvous with Hermes. Slowly inching in until magnetic force takes over and they're pulled in to dock with the mothership. Now, this was running pretty smoothly, and at this point, I actually had a crash later, just not too much longer after this, and that caused some issues. I had to reload the game in OpenGL, and for whatever reason, I think this is specific to me. I don't think it's OpenGL native. But whenever I'm running in OpenGL mode, I tend to lose struts randomly, and I didn't notice at the time, but I was actually down several rather key critical structural supports on this thing. You'll also notice the fuel lines are not reaching from those external tanks to the main engine on the lander. That is another byproduct of whenever I have a severe crash. And I'm split 50-50 whether I think it's caused by the actual crash or restarting in OpenGL mode. Like I said, I'm 50-50 either way. I don't really have the expertise to diagnose it for sure. So the downside of that is it tended to make Hermes kind of a little wobbly noodle where it should be a lot more rigid. And that has a lot of knock-on effects as far as trying to navigate and maintain a burn, because as the superstructure flexes, it tends to overcompensate itself, and SAS exacerbates it, so it's kind of a wild ride. Thankfully, I've got Kerbal Attachment System, and with the crew deployable struts, I'm going to be able to kind of take a duct tape solution and put this thing back together the way I want it to. But I'm fairly certain that lander is going to have to be trashed. Because of the cost of it, and for a little roleplay, I'm going to attach a heat shield and some parachutes and try to bring it back and recover it instead of just letting it burn up. Might try to find a way to get a heat shield with a docking port attached to it up into orbit and rendezvous the two and send it back. And since I have my Soyuz set up to integrate with remote tech, I'm going to have them stay in orbit. They're just going to autonomously come together and dock and wait around in Kerbin orbit for the Hermes to come back, and then we can put the crews back on them and bring them back home. A little bit of cost saving on my part. I haven't really been paying too much attention to funds. They haven't been much of an issue lately, but want to keep an eye on things, and well, these are pretty sophisticated little spacecraft. It'd be kind of a waste to just dunk them into the atmosphere. Especially when the crew's going to have to get back somehow. And if I believe correctly, one of the first space stations was actually just two Soyuz modules clapped together at the nose. They were either Soyuz or Vostoks, I can't remember. And I'm actually surprised I can't remember. So those are just going to hang out there until the crew is ready to come back. I'm actually going to make them rendezvous with Hermes, because Hermes is pretty maneuverable, but that's still a pretty darn big ship, and especially with its rather noodle-ish structural properties right now. I really want to minimize how much burning it's got to do. And one of the joys of suffering a crash while I have a crew in space is it introduced a bug into TAC life support where the crew leaves the vessel without life support, which is problematic. However, I decide to, later on, I do bite the bullet and end up completing what I was trying to do there, and I'll talk about that when I get there. However, Planning a trip to Minmus, for some reason, is one of the most annoyingly difficult things that I do in this game. There are better ways of doing it. I've discovered them and used them. I just haven't mastered them. So figuring that as long as he holds his breath for 2 minutes, we can probably get these struts connected, and that'll help the main superstructure hold together with the propulsion module a little better. Kind of hard to get that linked up there, but well under 2 minutes and get him back into the airlock. And with that done, Hermes is ready for its 2 burns out to Minmus. Because it has such low thrust for its mass, I had to make 2 passes around Kerbin before I could get my apoaps out to where Minmus should be. But it is well on its way for its first shakedown cruise. Unfortunately, because of the damage to the lander, my hopes of landing have been dashed. But that'll be for another episode, so stay tuned and thank you very much for watching.